First of all, welcome to TransTech. My name is Brian Combs. I'm a site manager here at TransTech. Today we'll be going through a pre-trip inspection. I'll have my co-worker David Slaughter as a pointer. We'll give you instructions on the various different functions of the truck, different parts. Just keep in mind there are some subtle differences between trucks. Even though that being the case, you study this pre-trip, you will be successful. To begin with, to start the vehicle inspection, we'll look for any puddles on the ground, looking for any dripping fluids from the engine and or transmission. Next, we'll move to the front of the truck. We'll check the lights, the clearance lights, the turn signals, make sure they're amber in color, not cracked or broken, clean and functional. Next, we'll check the headlights, clear in color, high and low beam, not cracked or broken, clear and functional. Now we'll raise the hood. Next, we'll start by checking the right side of the engine. I'll check all my hoses and lines to make sure it's not ripped, torn, broken, no leaks. I'll check the alternator to make sure it's securely mounted, operating properly, not damaged, broken. I'll check the exhaust, make sure the exhaust is securely mounted, check for possible leaks, excessive rust trails, or soot, check for possible cracks, dents, or holes. I'll check the water pump, make sure it's securely mounted, operating properly, no leaks, it's not damaged, and is belt driven. The belt should not move any more than 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch. I'll check the oil level. The oil level must be between add and full. If it's at the add mark, then add oil. Next, I'll check the cooling level. The cooling level should be between add and full. If low, add coolant. Next, I'll check the air compressor to make sure it's securely mounted, operating properly, not damaged or leaking hoses, and it is gear driven. Next, I will check the power steering level. The power steering level should be between add and full. Next, I'll check the gearbox to make sure it's securely mounted, not damaged or leaking, no missing nuts or bolts. Now we'll actually turn the wheel in order to be able to see the inside of the wheel properly. Now we'll actually check the steering linkage. We'll check the arm and the rods that are not worn or cracked, the joints and the sockets are not worn or loose, no missing nuts, bolts, or cotter pins. Next, we'll check the suspension to check to see if the springs are not cracked, broken, not loose, or missing bolts. Check to see if the springs are missing, not cracked, broke, and they're held together by 2 tight U-bolts. Now I check the braking system. I check the brake hoses, check for cracks or leaking hose, check each hose for signs of dry rot. Next, I'll check the brake chamber to make sure it's securely mounted, not cracked, broken, leaking, or dented. Next, I will check the slack adjuster and push rod. Make sure the slack adjuster and push rod is not bent or broken, not loose, or any missing parts. I will check the adjustment of the slack adjuster. It should not pull any more than 1 inch. 1 to 2 inch of pull needs to be adjusted. Anything over 2 is out of service. Now I'll check the brake shoes and brake drums. I'll make sure there's no oil or grease. There's at least 1/4 inch of pad. I'll check the brake drums to make sure not cracked, bent, or warped. I will check the rims to make sure they're not bent or cracked. Now I will check the lug nuts. I will check the lug nuts to make sure they're all visual and tight. There's no signs of shiny rust trails to indicate a loose nut. We'll then check the hub seal. Check that the hub seal is not leaking and the levels are between add and full. Now I will check the steer tires. I'll make sure there's a minimum of at least 4/32 of tread depth. Check for uneven wear or any tire separation. I'll check the tire sidewalls to make sure there's no cuts, rips, or bulges. I'll check the tire pressure with an air pressure gauge, and it should register between 100 and 110 psi. Now I'll check my drive tires. This is a Bud wheel. I'll check all 4 sidewalls to make sure there's no cuts, rips, or bulges. Then I will check to ensure that it has even wear and no tread separation. Also, the tires should be a minimum tread depth of 2/32. Finally, I will check the tire pressure with an air gauge to make sure it's between 100 to 110 psi. Next, I will check the rims to make sure they're not bent, cracked. I will also check the spacing between the tires and rims for any objects to ensure their tires are not touching. Then we'll check the lug nuts to make sure they are all visibly tight. There's no rust trails or shiny threads to indicate a loose nut. Finally, I will check the axle seal. It is a sealed unit and make sure there's no leaks, no loose or missing bolts. Next, I will check my trailer tires. I'll check all 4 sidewalls to make sure there's no cuts, rips, or bulges. Then I will ensure there's even wear and no tread separation across the tire. Then I will check the tire pressure with an air gauge to make sure it's between 100 to 110 psi. Finally, I will check the tires to make sure it has a minimum tread depth of 2/32. Next, I will check the rims. It is a Bud wheel. Check the inner and center and out of the rims to make sure there's no cracks, bends. I will check the spacing between the tires to make sure there's no foreign objects and ensure the tires are not touching. I will check to make sure all lug nuts are visible and tight. Make sure there's no rust trails or shiny threads to indicate a loose nut. Next, I will check the hub seal. I will check the hub seal to make sure it's not leaking and it has a proper level between add and full. Next, I will check my multifunction light. It's amber in color. It serves as left turn signal, 4 ways, and marker light. Next, I will check my mirror bracket and my mirrors to make sure they're properly mounted and secure. There's no damages, no broken mirrors. Now I will check the door. I will check the door to make sure it opens and closes properly. I will check the hinges to make sure they're not cracked or broken and they're tight, as well as a good rubber seal on the door, as well as the inside of the frame of the truck. Now I will check the steps, properly secure, clear of objects, and will support the weight of the driver. Next, I will check the fuel tank. I will check the saddle straps to make sure they're good and tight, has a rubber insulator. I will check the fuel cap to make sure it's tight, has a good rubber seal, and a DOT chain, as well as checking underneath the truck for any leaks. Next, I will check my emergency equipment in the side box. The side box should contain 3 reflective triangles. Next, I will check the air line as well as the electrical line. Sometimes we refer to this as the 6 points of contact from our tractor to our trailer. I will ensure there's no leaks in the air lines, no cuts, splices, or worn. Ensure that the electrical lines are not broken, frayed, not tangled, or hanging dangerously low. Check to ensure the glad hands are in the locked position, they're not damaged or leaking. Make sure the trailer electrical lines are firmly attached in place with a latch. Next, I will check the catwalk and steps. I will check to make sure they are securely mounted, free of objects, and no obstructions. Next, I will check the drive shaft to make sure it's not bent, cracked, and free of foreign objects. Next, I will check the frame and the cross members to make sure there's no illegal welds, no holes, or any damage of any kind. Next, I will check the front drive axle. I'll check the spring mounts to make sure they're securely mounted to the frame, not cracked or broken, no loose or missing bolts. Next, I will check the springs and the torque to make sure they're not shifted, cracked, not broken, and it's tight with 2 U-bolts. Next, I will check the shock absorbers to make sure they're securely mounted, no leaks, not dented, no loose or missing bolts. Also, I will check the air ride suspension. I will check the airbag to make sure it's not dry rotted, not damaged, or leaking. Also, I will check the airbag mounts. Now I'll check the brake assembly. I will check the brake hoses to make sure they're not cracked, worn, or leaking. I'll check the hose for any signs of dry rot. Next, I will check the brake chamber to make sure it's securely mounted, not cracked, not broken, not leaking, or dented. Next, I will check the slack adjuster as well as the push rod. The slack adjuster and push rod should not be bent or broken, not loose, or any missing parts. I'll check the adjustment on the slack adjuster. It should not pull any more than 1 inch. Any more than 2 is out of service. I will then check the brake shoes and brake drums. I will make sure there's no signs of oil or grease. I have at least a 1/4 of an inch of brake pad, brake shoes. I will check the brake drum, make sure it's not cracked, broken, warped. Next, we'll check the mud flaps. I will check to make sure they're securely mounted, no loose or missing bolts. Next, at the rear of the tractor, I'll check the lights and reflectors to make sure they're securely mounted, red in color, not cracked or broken. The functions include turn signals, four-ways, brake lights, and tail lights. Next, I will check the fifth wheel. I'll check the locking jaw. Check that the locking jaw is fully around the shank of the kingpin. It's not cracked, damaged, or broken. Next, I will check the kingpin as well as the apron. I'll check the kingpin that it's not bent, cracked, or any flat spotted, or the apron to make sure there's no cracks or damages, not broken. Then I will check the platform and mounting bolts. I will check for loose or missing bolts to make sure it's securely mounted to the frame of the tractor. I will then check the fifth wheel skid plate to make sure it is properly greased. Then I'll move to the fifth wheel locking pins. I will check for loose or missing pins in the side, make sure the pins are fully engaged, and check for any leaks on the airline fifth wheel. Then I will check the release arm. Ensure that the release arm is fully engaged and the safety latch is in place. Then I'll move to the front of the trailer. I'll check the clearance lights to make sure they're amber in color, not cracked or broken. Then I'll move to the header board to make sure it's securely mounted, free of any damage, and is strong enough to support the weight of the cargo, no cracks, bulges, or holes. Now I'll move to the trailer frame. I'll make sure it's not bent, cracked, or broken. There's no illegal welds in the frame. I will then check the cross members. Make sure it's not bent, broken, no loose or missing bolts. I will also check the floor for any holes or damages the entire length of the trailer. Then I will move to the DOT tape. Check that the DOT tape is clear and visible the whole entire length of the trailer. Now I'll move to the landing gear. I'll make sure there is enough space between the back of the tractor frame and the landing gear to ensure proper turning. Then I'll move to the landing gear itself. I'll check that the landing gear is fully raised, properly secure, not damaged, not cracked, no illegal welds. Then I'll move to the crank handle to ensure that it's in its cradle securely. Next, I'll move to my multifunction light. It's amber in color, serves as left turn signal, four-ways, and marker light. I'll make sure it's not cracked or broken, any sort of damage. I will then move to the front trailer axle. I will check the tandem release arms as well as the locking pins. Check that the locking pins are in place. The release arm is fully engaged. Then I will move to the spring mounts. I will make sure they are securely mounted to the frame, not cracked or broken, no loose or missing bolts. Next, I will move to the torque arm to make sure it's securely mounted, not loose, cracked, or any missing bolts. Then I will move to the springs to make sure they are not shifted, scissoring, cracked, broken, and they are held together by two tight U-bolts. Next, I will move to the braking system. I'll check the brake hoses, check for cracks, worn, leaks, check each hose for signs of dry rot. Then I will move to the brake chamber to make sure it's securely mounted, not cracked, broken, leaking, or dented. Then I will move to the slack adjuster and push rod. I will make sure that the slack adjuster and push rod are not bent or broken, no loose or missing parts. Check the adjustment of the slack adjuster. It should not pull any more than 1 inch. 1 to 2 inch needs to be adjusted. Anything over 2 inches is out of service. I will then move to my brake shoes and brake drum. I will make sure there's no signs of oil or grease. I have at least a 1/4 inch of pad on the brake shoes. Then I will move to check the brake drum to ensure there's no cracks, dents, warps. Now moving to the rear of the trailer, I will check the ABS light to make sure it's not cracked, broken, and securely mounted, and it's amber in color. Then I'll move to the marker light. It's red in color, securely mounted, not cracked or broken. Now I'll move to the mud flaps. I'll make sure they are securely mounted, not loose, or doesn't have any missing bolts. Now we move to the rear of the trailer. I'll check the ID lights, make sure they're red in color, they're not cracked or broken. I will then move to the door to make sure it's not damaged. It opens and closes properly, has two good cables. They're not frayed on either side. I will check the door latch to make sure it opens and closes properly and is securely in the lock position. They're red in color. They're not cracked and broken. The functions include tail lights, left and right turn signals, four-ways, and brake lights. Then I will check the DOT bumper. Make sure it's not cracked or broken, and it has full DOT tape the length of the bumper. Once the inspection is complete down the left side, then look down the right side to see if there's anything different that I would normally inspect. Once entering the cab, I'll check my seatbelt to make sure it's not ripped, frayed, torn, and latches properly. I will then check my mirrors to make sure they're not cracked, broken, and adjusted to me, the driver. I will then check my windshield to make sure it's not cracked, broken, no illegal stickers, and free of debris. I will now do my safety start. I'll make sure my buttons are pulled, it is in a neutral position, and I'll apply the brake when starting. When I start the engine, I will make sure my ABS light comes on and goes off. Then I will start by checking the water temperature to make sure it rises between normal operating level. Then I will do my oil pressure, make sure it rises to normal operating pressure. I will then check my primary and secondary air gauges to make sure they rise between 100 and 125. I will also check my voltmeter to make sure it's between 12 and 14 volts. Then I'll check my light indicators, my left turn signal, my right turn signal, my four-way flashers, as well as my high beam. Next, I will check my city horn, highway horn. I will check my windshield wipers to make sure there's no contact on metal-to-metal contact windshield, as well as the washer. I will then check for any spare fuses in the glove box. All right, now I'll perform the tug test. I'll put it in drive, push in my tractor brake, and pull firmly against my trailer brakes. Then I will place in neutral, pull my tractor brake, press in my trailer brake, put it in drive, and pull firmly on the tractor brake. I will then place in neutral, press both buttons in. I will then pull forward, apply the brakes, and make sure it does not pull left or right, and stops appropriately. I'll then place the truck in neutral, cut the truck off, turn the ignition on. I will then perform my lab test. I will press the brake for 1 minute, and I should not lose any more than 4 psi in 1 minute. Once that is satisfied, I will press the brake to approximately 60 psi. I will have an audible and visual alarm indicating low air pressure. Then I will continue to fan the brakes between 40 and 20, and my tractor protection valve should pop out, followed by the tractor. This concludes my in-cab inspection.
Welcome to Fleet Force Pre-Trip.
For my pre-trip inspection, the first thing I'm going to check is for leaks up under the truck, for leaks under the transmission or the engine. Then I'll move up, I'll check my clearance lights, make sure they're amber in color, not cracked or broken. To my headlights, clear in color, not cracked or broken. Turn signals, amber in color, not cracked or broken. Ready to raise the hood. On the right side of the engine, the first thing I want to check are my hoses, make sure there's no loose or missing clamps, no leaks, no damaged hoses. Then I'll check my alternator to make sure it's securely mounted, no loose or missing bolts, no broken or frayed wires, and it is belt driven. I would check my exhaust system to make sure there's no holes, no leaks, no soot trails that would indicate a leak. I'll move over to the left side. On the left side of the engine, first thing I want to check is my coolant level to make sure it is between add and full. I would check my power steering fluid to make sure it's between add and full. I'll check my power steering hoses to make sure there's no damage, no leaks. I'll move back. I'll check my air compressor to make sure it is securely mounted, no loose or missing bolts, no signs of leaks. I'll check my water pump to make sure that it is securely mounted, no loose or missing bolts, no signs of leaks, and it is belt driven. I would check my oil level. I want to make sure that the oil level is between add and full. From there, I'll move to my steering assembly. I'll check my gearbox to make sure it's securely mounted to the frame, no loose or missing bolts, no signs of leaks. I'll check my steering linkage, make sure that nothing's bent, broken, damaged. The sockets and joints are well lubricated and not worn. I'll check my castle nuts and cotter pins to make sure they're all there and tight. I'll move to my suspension. I'll check my spring mounts, front and rear, to make sure that they're securely mounted to the frame, no loose or missing bolts, and no damage. I will check my springs to make sure that they're not shifted, they're not cracked, broken, or missing, and held on with two tight U-bolts. I'll check my shock absorber to make sure that it is securely mounted, no loose or missing bolts, and it's not cracked, dented, or leaking. I'll move to the braking system. I will check my air lines, make sure they're not cut, frayed, or dry rotted, no signs of leaks. To my brake chamber, make sure that it is securely mounted, no loose or missing bolts, it's not cracked, dented, or leaking. I would check my push rod and slack adjuster. Make sure the push rod isn't bent or damaged. The slack adjuster has no loose or missing parts. I'll check the adjustment on it. With the brakes released, it should not pull more than 1 inch. 1 to 2 needs to be adjusted, over 2 out of service. I'll move in. I would check my brake shoes and brake drums. Make sure the brake shoes aren't worn dangerously thin, have at least a 1/4 inch brake pad, no signs of oil or grease. I would check my brake drum, make sure it's not cracked, broken, or warped. I'll check my rim, make sure there's no crack, holes, illegal welds on my rim, and this is a Bud wheel. I would check my lug nuts, make sure they're all there, they're tight, no rust trails or shiny threads that may indicate a loose nut. To my hub seal, to make sure it's between add and full, no signs of leaks. I'll check my tires, checking both sidewalls, no cuts, rips, or bulges. I have even wear, no tread separation, at least 4 30-seconds of tread. I will check the air pressure with the air gauge, and this tire should be 100 to 110. I want to check my light here. Make sure it's amber in color, not cracked or broken. I want to check my mirror. Make sure that it is securely mounted to the door. There's no cracked or broken mirrors. I will check my door to make sure that it will open and close properly. I have a good rubber seal and the hinges are tight. In my side compartment, I'll make sure I have 3 reflective triangles, a properly rated fire extinguisher with the needle in the green. And this one here should be at least a 5 BC. I'll come back and check my steps to make sure that they are securely mounted, no obstructions, and they will support my weight. I will check my fuel tank. Make sure my saddle straps are securely mounted. I have a good rubber insulator. Make sure my fuel cap is on secure, and my fuel tank has no leaks. I'll move back. I want to check my air lines. Make sure they're not dragging against the frame. Make sure there's no cut, frayed, or dry rot on my air lines, and they are securely attached to the trailer with good glad hands. I will check my electrical line. Make sure there's no broken or frayed wires, and it is securely attached to the trailer with a good latch. I'll check my steps and catwalk to make sure there's no obstructions and it will support my weight. I will check the truck frame to make sure there's no cracks, holes, or illegal welds or damage on the frame. I'm going to check my drive shaft. I want to make sure it's straight, there's no damage, the universals are well lubricated, and there's no obstructions around the drive shaft. Here I want to check my suspension, check my spring mounts to make sure that they're securely mounted to the frame, no loose or missing bolts, and no damage. Here I want to check my spring, make sure it's not shifted, cracked, broken, or missing. I want to check my U-bolts to make sure they're tight. Go back to my shock absorber to make sure that it is securely mounted, no loose or missing bolts, and it's not cracked, dented, or leaking. I want to check my airbag to make sure that it is securely mounted. The airbag itself is not cut, frayed, and no signs of leaks. Checking my braking system, the first thing I want to check are my air lines. Make sure they're not cut, frayed, or dry rotted, no signs of leaks. I want to check my brake chamber to make sure that it is securely mounted, no loose or missing bolts, and it is not cracked or dented. I want to check my slack adjuster and push rod to make sure that the push rod is not bent or damaged. The slack adjuster has no loose or missing parts. Check the adjustment on it. With the brakes released, the slack adjuster should not pull more than 1 inch. 1 to 2 needs to be adjusted. Anything over 2, out of service. I'll move into my brake shoes and brake drums. I want to make sure there's no oil or grease. The brake shoe is not worn dangerously thin. I have at least a 1/4 inch of brake pad, and the brake drum is not cracked, broken, or warped. I will check my wheel assembly. First thing I want to check is my spacing. Make sure that there's no obstructions, the tires aren't touching. I want to check my rims. These are Bud rims. I want to make sure there's no cracks, holes, illegal welds, or damage on my rims. I want to check my lug nuts to make sure that they're all there, they're tight, no signs of rust trails or shiny threads that may indicate a loose nut. I want to check my axle seal to make sure there's no signs of leaks. I want to check my tires. I want to check all 4 sidewalls, make sure there's no cuts, rips, or bulges. I have even wear, no mismatched tires, no tread separation. On these tires, at least 2 30-seconds of tread. I would check the air pressure with the air gauge, and it should be 100 to 110. I want to check my mud flap to make sure that it is securely mounted, no loose or missing bolts, and no damage. I want to check my lights and reflectors. They should be red in color, not cracked or broken. The functions of these lights are left and right turn signals, four-ways, tail lights, and brake lights. I want to check my fifth wheel. I want to make sure there's no gap between the trailer and the fifth wheel. I want to check my locking jaw to make sure it's locked around the shank of the kingpin. I want to check the kingpin itself to make sure it's not bent, damaged, and no flat spots. I want to check the apron of my trailer to make sure it's not bent, broken, or damaged. I want to check my sliding fifth wheel to make sure that the pins are locked in place. I want to check my release arm to make sure that it is in, safety latch is engaged. My platform and mounting bolts, make sure there's no damage on the platform and there's no loose or missing bolts. On the front of the trailer, I want to check my clearance lights, make sure they're amber in color, not cracked or broken. I want to check my headboard to make sure there's no apparent damage, there's no holes, no bulges. On the side of the trailer, I want to check my clearance light and marker light to make sure that they're amber in color, not cracked or broken. I want to check my trailer frame, make sure it's not bent, broken, or bulging, no damage, with clean, visible DOT tape. Here I want to check the clearance between my frame and landing gear, make sure I have adequate clearance for turning. While I'm here, I also want to check my cross members, make sure that there's no broken, cracked, or damaged cross members. And I'll check the floor of the trailer to make sure that there's no holes or damage the entire length of the trailer. I want to check my landing gear, make sure that there's no apparent damage on the landing gear, no loose or missing bolts. The handle is secure in its cradle, and the legs are fully raised. I want to check my light here to make sure that it's amber in color, not cracked or broken. Here, I want to check my sliding tandem. I want to make sure that the pins are locked in place, the handle is in and secure. I'll move to my suspension. I want to check my spring mounts to make sure it's securely mounted to the frame, no cracked or broken welds. I want to check my springs. I want to make sure that they're not shifted, cracked, broken, or missing, held on with two tight U-bolts. I want to check my torsion rod. I want to make sure it's not bent or damaged. I want to check my air lines. Make sure they're not cut, frayed, or dry rotted. No signs of leaks to my brake chamber. Securely mounted, no loose or missing bolts. It's not cracked, dented, or leaking. I want to move back to my push rod and slack adjuster. Make sure the push rod isn't bent or damaged. The slack adjuster has no loose or missing parts, and I would check the adjustment on it. With the brakes released, you should not pull more than 1 inch, 1 to 2. Needs adjustment, over 2 out of service. I'll move into my brake shoes and brake drums, make sure there's no signs of oil or grease. The brake drum is not worn dangerously thin, have at least a 1/4 inch of brake pad, and the brake drum is not cracked, broken, or warped. Move to my wheel assembly. I want to check the spacing between the tires, make sure there's no obstructions, the tires aren't touching. I want to check my rim. These are Bud rims. I want to make sure that there's no cracks, holes, illegal welds, or damage on my rim. Check my lug nuts, make sure that they're all there and tight, no rust trails or shiny threads that may indicate a loose nut. I want to check my hub seal. Make sure there's no signs of leaks and it is between add and full. I want to check my tires. I want to check all four sidewalls. Make sure there's no cuts, rips, or bulges. Even wear, no mismatched tires, no tread separation, at least 2 seconds to tread. I'll check the air pressure and it should be 100 to 110, and I'll check it with the air gauge. I want to check my mud flap. Make sure it's securely mounted, no loose or missing bolts, and no damage. My door tab. Make sure that it is securely mounted and it will support the weight of the door. I want to check my clearance light and marker light. Make sure they're red in color, not cracked or broken. On the back of the trailer, I want to check all of my lights back here. I want to make sure that they're red in color and not cracked or broken. The functions of these lights are left and right turn signals, four-ways, tail lights, and brake lights. I want to check my doors. Make sure there's no apparent damage on my doors. The hinges are strong enough to support the weight of the door. The door will open and close properly. I have good DOT tape along the back of my vehicle. I want to check my door chains to make sure that they are strong enough to support the weight of the door when it is open. Tag light, clear in color, not cracked or broken. After the outside inspection, I want to check my exterior lights. I'll turn my lights on. First thing I want to check are my marker and clearance lights on the trailer. Left turn signal, right turn signal, four ways, tail lights, and brake lights. I'll check the lights on the front of the truck. I'll check my clearance lights, left turn signal, right turn signal, four ways, and high and low beam. After that, I'll begin my end cab. First thing I want to check is my seat belt. Make sure it's not cut or frayed and it latches securely. I'll check my mirrors. Make sure they're clean and adjusted for me. I want to check my windshield. Make sure there's no cracks, damage, no illegal stickers or obstructions on my windshield. From there, I will do a safety start. I'll push in the clutch, make sure the truck is in neutral. When I start the engine, there should be an ABS light come on and go off. The ABS light came on and went off. First thing I'm going to check is my oil pressure. Make sure it rises to operating pressure. I would check my water temperature. It should rise to operating temperature. Check my voltmeter. Make sure it is between 12 and 14. I'll check my air pressure. Make sure it's reading between 100 and 125. Then I'll move over to the left. I want to check my indicator lights on the dash. Left turn signal indicator is working. Right turn signal indicator. Four ways and high beam indicator. I want to check my windshield wipers. Make sure they're functioning. And my windshield washer fluid. I'll move over. I'll check my city horn, highway horn. Move on over, I want to check my defrost and heater to make sure that they're operating properly. Move on over and make sure I have spare fuses and circuit breakers. From there, I'll begin a tug test. I'll place the truck in first gear. I'll release the tractor brakes. And I'll gently tug on the trailer brakes. Parking brake, release the trailer brakes, and I'll gently tug on the tractor brakes. Then I'll release both brakes. I'm going to check my service brake, and I'll do that by slowly moving forward. About 5 miles an hour, apply the service brakes to make sure that the vehicle stops in a straight line and does not pull left or right. From there, I'll start my lab. I'll turn the engine off. Turn the ignition back on, but not starting the truck. Make sure both brakes are released. I'm going to sit back and I'm going to watch my air gauge. I should not lose more than 4 psi in 1 minute with the brake applied. Once I'm satisfied with that, I'm going to check my alarm. My alarm low air warning should come on around 60 psi. I'll pay my brake till it comes on. I have a low air warning at approximately 60 psi. I'll continue fanning it down between 40 and 20 psi. My tractor protection valve should automatically close, followed by my tractor brakes. And my buttons are working properly. That should end my in-cab inspection.